I know many of you are familiar with Prenda, the microschool network that was started in 2018 by Kelly Smith as a small pod in his living room for his son and others in his neighborhood, and has now grown to serve thousands of learners in hundreds of microschools across the US. I've had Kelly on the podcast before, as well as some of the parents who run Prenda microschools in their homes or local community spaces. And I wanted Kaity Broadbent to come on the show to talk more about Prenda's vision and impact. Kaity currently serves as Prenda's Chief Empowerment Advocate and is such a thoughtful and insightful thought leader on the topic of personalized learning and alternative education models more generally. Prior to Prenda, Kaity was a speech language pathologist, literacy coach, and curriculum designer. She's a certified peaceful parenting coach and mom to four kids who attend Prenda microschools. They are ages 4 to 11. Kaity Broadbent, welcome to the Liberated podcast.
Thanks so much, Carrie. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's so great to have you here. I'd love to start, if we could, with your experience working in the public schools as a speech language pathologist. And I know later you worked with stroke victims or stroke patients outside of schooling, more in the kind of medical space. But tell us a little bit about what it was in those kind of early days working in the public schools and sort of what your observations were there that ultimately may have led you to start to think about alternative learning models.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll have to note that I was a speech language pathologist in public schools for a short time, and it was before I had kids. And before you have kids, like you think you just like know how you're going to raise your kids and how everything should be, and then you have kids, and it's like, oh, this is very different, and I have a very different perspective on all of this. So, this was before I had kids. But I'm working in our public schools and seeing a lot of really great things going on, and then a lot of things where I'm just kind of scratching my head, essentially. But like the biggest take home from my experience is that school as an adult interacting with kids in a public school, and I won't say let's just say like traditional education, like classroom-based teacher-led education, because I don't think publicly funded education is a very narrow term. That's very broad. So just that kind of approach, the traditional approach to, or I think I've heard you call it the conventional approach to education. Um, it's mostly about getting kids to do things that they don't want to do. And so my job as a speech language pathologist, I was supposed to be focusing on helping kids gain literacy skills, language skills, help them with articulation, help them with their pragmatic social skills. But all of that had to be layered with bribes or punishments in order to get them to sit, to focus, to want to do the thing. Like what game could I like mix into this articulation exercise that would make it fun for them? Are they going to get a Skittle? Are they going to get their sticker? And I just grew tired of it, essentially. But I didn't know in the time when I was in that phase of my career, I didn't have the context that I have now, having had kids, having experienced other educational um, like settings and philosophies, I'll say. And so I will tell you this story, and it is maybe the moment that I'm the most ashamed of in my entire like adult career. But I think it emphasizes like the massive 180-degree shift that I've had like internally in my beliefs. Um, and especially going from this more behavioralist, like I'm in charge, you do what I say, you don't have thoughts or opinions or interests or passions. Your job is to sit and to listen and obey. To now where I'm like so far on the other side of the spectrum where I like love and respect every child's uniqueness and their individuality and their desires and their thoughts. And I'm just like, I've come totally full circle. But I think that this story really illustrates where most people are. And then my journey away from that is maybe inspiring or like giving other people hope that we can change hearts and minds here, because we really need to be focused on creating learning environments that kids love being in and where they can remember that that learning is a naturally enjoyable thing again, right? So then we can stop this whole kids hating school fight that millions and millions of parents fight every morning when they send their kids to school. So I was sitting with this kid and he was like the troublemaker at our elementary school. He was like a third grader and he just like, he had a lot of quote unquote behaviors that adults did not like. And I was not going to have this little kid like mess with me, right? I was going to show him who's boss, right? So he's sitting in my speech language pathology office. I'm lucky that I get to work with kids like on one. I don't know how teachers manage full classrooms. It's a miracle to me. Anyway, so I had him pick a sticker and he was like, ooh, that one. And so I took the sticker off and I held it right in front of him. And I was asking him to do this game or whatever. And I was like, as soon as you like, he was having a hard time like keeping his bum in his chair. He kept like moving in his chair. And so that was the behavior that I focused on. It's like, if your bum leaves your chair, I'm going to rip this sticker up and I'm going to put it in the garbage. And I just watched, like we were doing our activity and his bum left. And I just immediately right in front of his face, ripped his sticker up and put it in the garbage just to show him that he cannot mess with me and that I was in control. Right. Like, I don't like, it's so tragic to me that I did that to a child, but so real. Like the feeling that we as adults experience, the need to control children, the need to have them sit neatly in rows, it runs deep in our culture, and it almost has become this badge of honor as an educator if you can control a class, right? So that's where I was at. That was my experience being a public educator.
So then you said parenthood was really what sort of shifted your perspective, and maybe opened your mind to different ways of approaching teaching and learning. So tell us a little bit about that. I know you were homeschooling your children until, up until you found Prenda. We'll talk about, kind of your introduction to Kelly in just a moment. But how did parenthood sort of shift your perspective on education, and what were you thinking about for your children's education in those early days?
Yeah. So I saw in public school essentially that we were wasting a lot of time, right? And so I was thinking after I was a speech language pathologist for a little while, and then I jumped out into work in the medical field doing speech language pathology with stroke victims. And I just saw that they were inherently motivated to do the things, right? They were paying lots of money to talk to me. They wanted extra homework. They were begging me for extra therapy time. And then
And you
after I'd
didn't
had
have to
those,
cut up stickers.
I didn't cut up any stickers for them or anything. um, so I kind of after I had those two experiences, then I started having kids of my own. And I thought, how are we going to get this kind of motivation back into school, right? How can I raise and educate my kids with a foundation of a love of learning? And how can I create relationships and environments for them that won't ruin their relationship with learning, essentially, like I saw happening in schools. Um, so then I had, let's see, I probably had so like you said, I have four kids now. This is when they were very little. So I have maybe like a 3.5-year-old and a 2-year-old. And my 3.5-year-old loves me. We're good. He's a little crazy sometimes, but our relationship is good. 2-year-old does not like me. 2-year-old is dad's son, essentially. And looking back, I can see like how that happened because 3-year-old was very demanding and like was used to having my full attention. So after I was done like nursing 2-year-old when he was little, I would hand him over to dad. And so he had this really great attachment with his dad. And I did not understand attachment or relationships. I did not understand empathy. I grew up raised in a house where like feelings were not okay. Um, I'll share a little story here quickly about my dad just to paint the picture of how unempathetic and cold my heart really was. I mean, I'm the lady that rips stickers up. Okay. When I was growing up in school, I could not manage to get straight A's. Like I was like a B- student. And my sister, she was valedictorian and she was so awesome. She was student body president at high school. Like my parents were just like, she is it, right? We have won with this one. And so I was always just feeling like I'm trying hard and I'm like doing it fine, but I'm not winning like the like love and acceptance game that we all play, right? When we're kids. Um, and so my family was not very like super supportive, very gentle, very kind, but not like super like emotional. Like we did not say I love you at all. And so the very first time I heard my dad say I love you was when I was a junior in college. And it was right after I'd gotten straight A's for the first time in my life in college. And I said, Dad, I got straight A's. And he said, That's so awesome. I love you. And I don't think he realized that that was the first time he'd ever said that he loved me. But that really drove home the idea that like grades and performance means love and value. And so I really didn't want to raise my kids with that same kind of exchange or like currency, but I didn't know how to do it differently, right? So I'm struggling with my 2-year-old who like does not like me. He would literally say things to me like, "Mom, I have 5 million hugs in me for dad and I have 0 hugs in me for you." Like he just was not having it. Like he did not feel this relationship with me. And then one day I get a book in the mail. It's called Easy to Love, Difficult to Discipline. It's a used copy. This is a Becky Bailey book. I had never heard of her. I had never heard of treating children differently. I was reading books like How to Parent a Strong-Willed Child and like very aggressive parenting, um, which I was living into, and it was not working. And it was not creating hugs for me and my children, apparently. And so I'm like hovering. I'm like, I don't know who sent me this book. I didn't order it. I called my mom and she was like, I've never heard of that book. I did not send this to you. And so I'm like hovering over the garbage can to be like, this is a weird, like 90s pop psychology book, and I'm just going to throw it away. And then something just said, like, don't throw the book away. And so I took the book out of the garbage can, put it on my shelf, didn't look at it for a year and a half. So struggling still with now he's 3.5. He's still nothing has worked. None of my parenting strong-willed children or being consistent or any of that has worked with him. I have another baby now. And I'm like, I'm going to read this book. And so I just start reading it. Blows my mind that there is an entirely different way to be with children. And I didn't know this growing up, and I didn't learn this as in grad school as a speech language pathologist. I didn't learn it the hard way. Like I needed this book. And so that just kind of um, just totally changed the trajectory I was on as a person and what I thought and believed about children. And that led me to discovering Gordon Neufeld and the Neufeld Institute, reading Hold On to Your Kids, and discovering it's called many things, attachment parenting, re- peaceful parenting. So I finally became like a peaceful parenting coach to help other parents kind of make this transition. But that's kind of been the foundation of why I've wanted to do something different for my kids and to help other families have a more peaceful and like connected experience raising their kids. And school is at the heart of so much of how we raise. It's one of the main things we hire as parents to raise our kids, right? And so I got really involved in education and started homeschooling and building curriculum and all sorts of things. So that's kind of
I
the
love that.
story.
Yeah, I mean, attachment parenting was definitely my gateway into homeschooling and alternative
Mm,
education as well. It's sort of that relationship with children and trusting children and building those partnerships with them, and then allowing their kind of individuality and creativity to continue to emerge as they get older, not just in infancy and toddlerhood. So,
right.
how did that change your relationship then with your children when you discovered those approaches?
It it was like night and day, honestly. Like suddenly had a lot of hugs in me for him. And I was able to convey to him that like I don't love him and accept him just when he's good, quote unquote, when he's good, when he like listens to me and doesn't hit his brother or whatever. Like we were really able to step into like unconditional parenting. And that has led me to be able to do something in my mind that I call like unconditional educating, where it's like, I don't care if you struggle with the math. Like I don't care if you lose your volleyball game. Like I'm not putting value in this performance. I'm putting value in the effort and in the like the personal characteristics, the core values that it's instilling in you, right? I had a conversation the other day. I was taking my son, my 11-year-old, to volleyball, and he's like, "Oh, I'm like worried that we're going to lose." And I'm like, "I could not care less if you win or lose this game. The only thing I care about is you like going for the ball and helping your team and like cheering people up and like having this attitude, right?" And he was like, "Okay." And then just me giving him the permission to not care about that was a big stress reliever. And he went into that game and he did a great job.
Amazing. So, fast forward a little bit to 2018. What was happening for you when you met Kelly? Kind of how did you meet Kelly and discover Prenda? What was that story?
Yes. So 2018, I had 3 kids and I was about to be pregnant again. Did a lot of having kids in those years. Um, so I was homeschooling my kids and had gotten really, so as a speech language pathologist, I knew I was not trained at all in like literacy, but I just knew that I hated illiteracy so hard. I just thought that it was so crazy. I heard this story once um, about an old lady who had taught hundreds of kids how to read. This was like in the 1800s or early 1900s. And when I read the story, I was like, that's what I want my entire life to be about. Like, I want to be that old lady. And so as my kids started to learn how to read, I started developing my own literacy curriculum because I didn't see anything out there in the world that was really aligned to the research around what good reading instruction looks like. It wasn't in our schools, and it wasn't available. I think it was available, but it was really inaccessible due to complexity and cost. And I was like, how is a normal parent navigating this, right? So I started creating a literacy program and homeschooling my kids, and then um, I got a random email from someone I didn't know on some sort of homeschool email saying, hey, there's this guy in Mesa. I live in Gilbert, it's like 20 minutes away. There's this guy in Mesa who's doing this weird thing called microschools. And if you homeschool, like you might want to look into it. And so I found him on Facebook, on the Prenda Facebook page, and I just sent him a message saying, hey, like it seems like our beliefs about education are very similar. Like maybe we should be friends. And so he messaged me back, totally jokingly. He said, let's talk first and then we'll decide if we want to be friends. And so um, knowing Kelly now, it makes a lot of sense. He's a wonderful, wonderful person. He would always want to be friends with me. So then I was just like, can I drive to your house right now? And he was like, sure, come on over. And so I went over and sat at his kitchen table for like 3 hours and grilled him about what a microschool was, what his educational beliefs were, what his intentions were with creating Prenda. And I left that kitchen table just knowing that microschools were going to completely change the educational landscape. Because as a speech language pathologist, I saw teachers trying to work these big classrooms, getting burnt out. My office was right next door. I shared a door to the teacher's lounge, and I heard what went on. And I knew that those were not healthy adults because of what they were being asked to do. The level of pressure and all of the things that are put on that classroom teacher are just not sustainable. And then I saw from a parent's perspective, like I've chosen to homeschool. I, as a homeschool mom, feel pretty isolated. I feel like this huge burden is on me. I don't necessarily think that I'm an expert in any of these things. I have this constant nagging imposter syndrome where I'm thinking, am I actually hurting my kids by doing this? Am I giving them enough, right? And then I see it from the child's perspective, so hard to be a little fish in a big sea and feel like I have this relationship and this person and that my psychological needs are being met so that I can actually develop in my prefrontal cortex and learn and pay attention and learn to manage my behavior in ways that make adults happy. um, so I could just kind of saw from all perspectives how a micro school made a more manageable job for the teacher, or we call them a guide. It created a better learning environment for the learner. And then as a parent, I had way more say over what happened to my child, but I didn't feel alone in the journey. I felt like, oh, now I have a partner who is here to advocate for my, desires for my kid and my goals for them, and to help the child actually participate in that conversation as well. And then with Prenda, we were able to build a whole back-end support team where if you, as a guide, don't know something, you can just call Prenda and you have this whole team of academic support coaches who will look at the, child's performance data, all that stuff with you and help you problem solve it. And so I felt like I don't see anyone losing in this situation, And so I just left that conversation knowing that it was going to change the world and that I was going to participate in it. And I had no idea how, because I had 3 little kids and I was homeschooling. And so I guess I was like, Kelly, are you going to do this? And are you going to do this? And he sent me like the whole business plan and proposal after that meeting. And I like left a bunch of comments on it. I'm like, oh, you should do this. Like, do you understand this like motivational principle, or like how did this pedagogical thing? And he's not an educator, right? He is a physics guy from MIT who is making decisions based on like common sense and what he can, research. Not that I'm like bringing any huge educational acumen to the equation as a homeschool mom and a speech language pathologist. But he was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And then I was like, you should do this in one of these comments. I just remember this. And he was like, that's going to take a lot of years. Or he was like, yes, it will take a long time. Like, what are you doing for the next few years? As
That's
just
so
like an
cute.
invitation to like really be a part of this process. And I'm so, so grateful for that because it has been an amazing ride of helping so many families come to helping just be able to find a learning environment for their kid that makes their kid like life and like school and just feel alive again.
Yeah, such a powerful story. So, Kaity, when you met Kelly, was it just still that one pod that he was running in his living room?
Yes. So he
Yeah.
had just wrapped up he was in the middle of his first pilot semester with those kids when I met him. Um, and then that summer is when I started kind of building things for Prenda. And then that fall, we had like one other guide that wanted to do it. It was one of Kelly's friends' wives that was going to start a microschool, and we were literally like writing things the night before, and like I would like create the projects. Kelly would print them out and drive them to her house the next day. It's like, okay, here's what you like. It was a very startup, very lean. We had one developer, I think Prenda World, which is our software, looked like a blue screen with like 3 buttons on it. But we were doing school and slowly and like, well, actually not very slowly, but rapidly, the word spread. And other people were like, I want a guide, I want to do this. And we from the very beginning wanted to create something that could be run by a parent because we didn't
Mm,
want to create a company to come in and solve the needs of a community. We wanted to create tools that could help the community, the families be empowered to solve their own problems. Because what we saw in conventional education is that there are a lot of people up here making decisions for people down here that they didn't, there's a disconnect, right? You get a letter from the district that says now you have to do something this way, but the district people don't understand that 7-year-old boy, right? But parents do. Parents are the experts in their kids. And we really wanted to build something that capitalized on that and empowered parents to not only step up and become like the answer to their kids' issues and concerns with school, but be able to serve those around them and also make an economic impact on their family.
yeah. So tell us a little bit more about the Prenda model. What does it look like in practice? What are some of the technological tools that enable this entrepreneurship to happen? Kind of what does it look like? And then we can talk about some of the research that you've done on outcomes, because there's just some incredible research that you have that this works. But let's
Yeah,
start with kind of sort of what the tools are and how it works.
sure. Okay, so we bucket kind of what we do into two categories. We make a K through 8th student-led, student-centered curriculum. And then in the other column, we have a microschool management platform, right? So if you're a guide coming to this, you're going to get a whole suite of tools that help you run a school, like administration things. Like, how do I let people know about my school? Well, you're going to create a guide profile in Prenda World, and that's going to go on our microschool marketplace. Hundreds of parents every week come to this microschool marketplace looking to place their child in a microschool. They're going to find you, they're going to be able to reach out to you. Um, we also, you can create your calendar, you can access all of the curriculum, which we'll talk about in a minute. We also do all of the back end business, like invoicing, processing for you. So that's very intimidating to a lot of people stepping into entrepreneurship. So we help with that piece. We also train you from the ground up on all of the tools and not only the education piece, but the culture piece, how to create a relationship. Like you could look at this Zoom call right now or any room and say like, that's the environment, really. But that environment feels one way when you're in that space with a certain group of people. But then imagine that like someone who makes you feel really uncomfortable suddenly shows up in that environment. Like that presence of that person, that relationship is actually the thing that changes the culture of that environment, right? So setting culture is about building relationships. And just like my experience, I did not know how to build relationships with kids because of the way that I was raised and because of our societal like norms, right? And so we teach you all of the things that I had to struggle for decades to realize. We lay that out and we help you develop those skills not only to manage the education piece, but to manage all of the feelings and the motivational pieces and things like that. So that's kind of the micro school management platform. And then for the curriculum, we run a 4-part day. The first part of the day is called Connect Mode, where you're really setting that class culture. We created a program called Prenda Camp. Camp stands for Community, Autonomy, Mindset, and Purpose. And so every Prenda day is really like all of the Prenda micro schools. On Mondays, everyone's focusing on community. We're teaching conflict resolution. We're teaching about communication. Um, we're living our core values and thinking, what does it mean to dare greatly? Dare greatly is one of our core values. Like, what does that mean, and how are we doing that? We're having discussions. We're doing journal prompts about all of these kind of big ideas to help kids become empowered learners, to grow into the idea that they own their education and that they don't need to, that their role as a student is not to sit still and listen, right? It's to actively participate, to question, and to push, right? We want to engender that in them. And so many of these kids are coming in from conventional schooling. They don't know how to do that. So we explicitly teach them and give them permission and invite them to really put on a different hat as a learner. So that's what Connect Mode is all about. Conquer mode is the next area of time of the day. And this is where we do mastery-based, individualized, self-paced learning. So you'll have in a traditional school, you'll have a teacher saying a lesson, right? She can only have one stream of words coming out of her mouth at one time. She's got 25 kids. They're all 9 or close to 9, right? But they're all at actually very different levels. So she has to say the scripted curriculum schedule stuff, right? But then she has to differentiate her instruction. And she usually does that through something called ability grouping, which creates unhealthy culture in a classroom, because now like, oh, I'm in a slow reader group, or like, I'm really good at math, like I'm smarter than other people, right? So then I'm going to treat my peers differently based on what the adults have told me is valuable, how we gain value as humans in our tribes, in our classrooms, is to be smart. And if you get a wrong answer, that means you're less valuable. And if you get the right answers, that means you're more valuable, right? And so we do this really damaging thing called ability grouping, where you only get what you need part of the time. And when you are getting what you need, it's like socially and more like with your morale, your educational morale, we'll say, is damaging to that. So what we do is we take all the kids at Prenda take a digital adaptive diagnostic test to get an accurate level of what they know and what they need to know next. We don't compare kids to each other. This isn't this isn't data that we weaponize against the child. This is just information that we actually are super transparent with the child about, to say, here's where you're at. And there is no shame in that. And you're not compared to anyone else. Everyone around this kitchen table is going to run their own race. And you're here to just run your own race, right? And here's where you're at. So they take an adaptive diagnostic test, and then we match them with a curriculum that works for them. So we're building this like kitchen table visualization where we have kids that are different ages sitting around the same table, learning from different curriculums at different levels, at different paces, right? That sounds incredibly complicated. If you were trying to do that as a teacher with 25 kids, you would lose your mind, right? But with Prenda, and because we use digital adaptive tools to really personalize and individualize the learning, just during this time of the day, kids are using all of their learning minutes to get what they need academically, and they're cheering each other on instead of judging each other. So that's like what Conquer is all about.
Yeah, and these tools that you're using aren't necessarily Prenda tools, right? You're bringing in curriculum resources from a variety of different sources. Can you share a little bit more about what those curriculum tools might look like?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, like you said, we offer a suite of already existing partnerships that you can select from, and that conversation is Prenda will give a recommendation, and then the guide and the parent and the student are actually going to be the ones that decide what curriculum tools they use. And we have selected, there are hundreds of educational technology tools, and some of them are amazing and some of them are complete garbage. And so we have gone through the whole gamut of them, and we have a very rigorous rubric that we've applied to hundreds of tools. And we've pulled in like the top 5 to 10. Like, these are really good tools. They are wholesome. They are not overstimulating. They're not overly gamified. They help give kids their own data. They're transparent to the child. So those are kind of the things that we look at when we're evaluating a tool. I'll just tell you some of my favorite tools. My favorite tool for language is called Lexia. Super robust, K through 8, like all of the things you need in an ELA program. Something, if you're looking at evaluating educational technology, something that's really important, we learned this a lot the early years of Prenda, digital learning is great, but it needs to be reinforced with pencil and paper learning and conversation. Okay. So we look for tools that have a digital component, but also a print-based component. So most of our stuff will be like a digital lesson, or a digital manipulative experience that like really drives home the concept, and then a practice, pencil and paper. And then we train the guides to, when they're helping, to ask questions and have kids reteach the concepts. Right. So we're getting this information through their brains in a lot of different ways so that they will retain it. Because in the early days before we did this, we saw really great progress. These kids were doing 2.5 years of learning in 1 year, right? But then when we would do the third party like adaptive testing, it's like, oh, you didn't really understand that concept. The teaching wasn't deep enough, right? So now we've kind of come to the middle a little bit, and you can see this in our data, like the learning has slowed down a little bit. Now kids only move on average 135% of a school year instead of 200%, but the retention is there, right? Which is that sweet spot of learning. So yeah, that's, oh, and then, so that's ELA. My favorite math tool is called Nori, which they're going out of business. I like literally cried real tears when I heard this. But it's such a good program. But what you're looking for in math is really a linear, mastery-based experience that really builds concepts upon concepts, and that can give the kids layered levels of support. So in Nori, for example, you'll get a lesson and then some practice questions, but then in every question, if you don't understand something, there's a little walk me through tutor that you can click on that will show you just that part. You can go back and watch the video again. And then something Prenda's added to this is 24-hour-a-day math tutoring. So we have a network of tutors who are always online. And if you're a Prenda student and you're like, I don't get this, all you have to do is click a button. And then within 1 minute, you're talking to a live math tutor. You send them a screenshot of what you're working on. So it's not some like arbitrary lesson that a tutor has made up and is imposing on you. It's like, no, this is right where I'm at. And they are trained to, through the Socratic method, help you discover the answer to that math problem. So as a guide, that's a huge benefit too, because it's like, oh, my math skills top out in like 5th grade. Like it's embarrassing. But that's how a lot of us are. Like we are, this is, I mean, something funny, but everyone's like really defending the public school system. And it's like, well, that's the system that makes you scared to help one of your kids do 5th grade math, right? Like it hasn't been effective for
Right.
you, you know?
Yeah.
So
So
yeah,
what are you
so
going to do now that Nori's going out of business?
we have other tools. There are other really good math tools. Like ed tech is kind of swamped with math tools and a little light on the language side, actually.
Okay.
So there's lots of things to pick from. And we've never had just one tool. We usually have like at least 4, sometimes 5 different math tools that people can choose from depending on their grade, their learning style, and their literacy skills. Because some curriculums require a lot of actual literacy. And when we see gaps like this, we will create tools. So when I met Kelly, his micro school was they're like big kids that could already read. And as a speech language pathologist and someone who hates illiteracy, I'm like, well, my kids are little and I want a K-2 micro school that doesn't exist yet. And so this first year I was homeschooling, I flipped my homeschool into a micro school and ran a little like pre-K 1st grade, like guinea pig class and experiment for Prenda. And I created a program called Treasure Hunt Reading that is video-based instruction with me in my jungle vest as Adventure Kate, going through Orton Gillingham, really solid, deep phonics instruction so that we don't have to get guides to understand all of these really difficult language concepts. They can learn alongside their students, because even programs like Lexia are not giving our kids the phonics foundation that they really need. So we had to create that one. So we do create a lot of the content, all of the content for create mode and what we call, all of the content for connect mode and for collaborate mode and for create mode. We create all of that. But for Conquer, that's where we're bringing in these third-party tools to partner.
Yeah, so I cut you off. You're going to tell us about some of those other modes. So
Sure,
we were
yeah.
in Conquer mode. What else?
Yeah, so the next one is collaborate mode. They're doing Socratic discussions, debates, science, history, social studies, all of that. And they're doing it through a very student-centered, inquiry-led way. Something that makes kids hate school is that it's really disengaging because they don't make any choices, right? And so we bring a ton of student voice and choice into this experience. We also help guide that curiosity by introducing and suggesting. It's like, oh, you could learn about World War II airplanes, or you could learn about Egypt. It's like Pinterest for kids. It's like, oh, that looks interesting. I'm going to click on that. And then we've curated all of these resources to help kids access what they're curious about, right? So we'll partner with like World Book and Encyclopedia Britannica and Brain Pop and all of, all of these cool companies that at a touch of a button, your Prenda kid now has curated access to. So instead of like just Googling Egypt and then trying to find some sort of, you know, fourth grade, fifth grade accessible content, that's all at the touch of their fingers, and they're also a lot safer. We want to teach those skills, but like these are younger kids. We don't actually offer high school where we would provide a much like more open experience. So we want to help these kids become judicious internet users and seekers of knowledge, and to be able to evaluate when they find something that's high quality versus low quality, all of those things. But for now, we just do a lot of curation, and then the student leader and collaborate will choose from our activity log or like what do we call it? Activity library. There's like a ton of different collaborative, interactive, whole group experiences that you can pair with any topic of curiosity. So it's like, I'm the student leader. I want to do this talk show activity with ancient Egypt, and we're going to put those together, and we're going to do that for the next few days. And then another person will have a chance to choose a topic. So that's kind of how collaborate mode works.
Mm-hmm.
And then create mode is project-based learning. So we have a project-based learning library with hundreds of projects that kids can choose from. In the K through 2 world, it's a little bit more guide-led. There's a little bit more adult scaffolding in some ways, but then it's very like play and nature and art based as well. So it's kind of like a mix. But yeah, that's create mode. So that's the day.
Amazing. So I'd love to talk about numbers for a moment at the micro level and at the macro level for Prenda. So at the micro level, for your micro schools, do you provide guidance on how big the micro school should be, how small it should be? What do these micro schools look like individually?
So there is kind of a sweet spot that we recommend 5 to 10 kids. If you have less than 5 kids, it's hard to get like enough like group energy and really help that feel like a social experience for those kids. So 5 to 10 is our sweet spot. You only need 2 kids from 2 different families to start, because a lot of our micro schools, it's a new concept, right? So to market that and to help other families feel like, oh yeah, this looks cool. It's hard to do that without actually just starting it and be like, come and see what we're doing, right? And so we have this really low number for entry, right? Just your kids and another family of kids. But we really want to encourage them to grow that to 5 to 10 kids, and we help with that student recruitment process. We do have micro schools that have 12. And typically it's like a little bit older. It's like a middle school that has 12, which is fine. We do have we no longer, we've kind of changed internally as a company with like saying, really being pretty prescriptive, like you guys should do this, you should do it this way, to like just giving people suggestions and really letting our guides and parents dictate what happens in those micro schools. So we do have micro schools that have like 15 kids in them. And they feel a little different when you walk in, it feels like a little busier. And I think that's really good. If those kids and those parents are happy and those kids are developing and they're progressing academically and socially, like more power to them. I think what happens when we don't just like throw numbers at guides, we try to educate them on the why behind it. And the goal of a micro school is to have the guide have enough emotional energy to have an individual relationship with each child. And when we get into groups greater than 10, we start using methods of control that actually damage our relationships. They're more coercive. We start putting charts on the walls and, I'll put your card on yellow, or I'm going to send we just use all of these. You can get a sticker, all of these methods that really hold a child away from a true love of learning. And so we just give that guidance. And then, if you can have a group of 15, and sometimes we'll get guides who are coming out of teaching and they're used to having 25 or 30 kids. So they're like, I can handle more kids. Like, you don't need to like maybe 10 if you like have no experience, but I can handle this. And I tell them, you can handle it. The child, you can handle 15 kids. The individual child cannot handle being 1 in 15. They need to
Mm.
be 1 in 8. Like they can't handle it. It's not about you, it's about the child. And that's the consistent pattern that I'm seeing across the educational landscape, is that the reason it's not working is because we make decisions based on what's convenient for adults and not what's best for kids. And kids don't get to be in the legislation room. They don't get to be in the district office. They're not in the teacher's lounge. They're not in principal meetings. Like they're not making any of these decisions, yet they are the end user of everything that we decide. And they really just don't have a voice. And so whoever's loudest in those meetings is going to get what they want, right? And it's not going to be the child. So we're trying to really flip that at Prenda, and really listen to the voices of children, and we do, maybe we could, this is a good segue into data. We interview all of the kids as they come in, and we have interviewed thousands and thousands of kids around their pre-Prenda experience versus their Prenda experience. And it's pretty wild what we found.
Yeah, so that's great. Let's actually jump to that, and then I'll go back to numbers in terms of microschooling in a second. But I'd love to hear both your sort of academic and non-academic success metrics.
Yeah, I'm actually just pulling up. I'm like the worst at remembering like actual numbers, so I'm just going to pull things up so I can look at them real quick. But my brain needs to remember what things are called. Okay, so let's talk about, we bracket this into 2 categories. We call one of the categories empowerment, and then we look at academics, and within academics we look at achievement, achievement, like the grade level that they're performing at, which I mean, personally I don't care about grade levels, but that's kind of how, that's like it's the currency, the coin of the realm, as they say. It's like, this is how we talk about education now. So talking about it in other terms is less effective, even though I don't believe in how it's currently talked about. I think how it's currently talked about and measured is damaging. Okay, so we have really 4 main, when we're talking about empowerment, we're talking about 4 main things. One is a student's relationship with learning. Do they see themselves as a learner, right? And do they see their guide as someone who's really helping them with that relationship with learning? So 92% of students say that their guide has had a positive influence on their relationship with learning. 81% of kids highly recommend their guides. So they're really getting, and those numbers, that's not how, if you ask a 5th grader in conventional learning what he thinks about his teacher, like, I don't think you'll get those numbers, right? I wish I had some comparison data. I'm sure it's out there. But the kids are happy with their adult-child relationships finally, and they feel like this. One of my favorite parenting books is called Rest, Play, Grow. It's by Deborah McNamara. And she talks about how the child's brain really needs to come into this state of rest, instead of anxiety or panic, or like we just waste a lot. The child's brain like wastes a lot of energy when they're trying to get our acceptance and love, because to their brain, that means survival, right? Because when a baby's born, they cannot fend for themselves. And so every need that is going to be met is going to be met through a relationship. And so the idea that relationships mean survival to the human brain is very, very strong. And so if we don't get this adult-child relationship thing right, like we cannot move on. The brain will literally just not move on from needing this. And then that influences later brain development and mental health in ways that are scary to think about. Okay, so we're really focusing on the adult-child relationship there. When we talk about mastery-based learning, this is one of my favorite things to talk about in the data, because the results are shocking. So we ask kids, in your pre-print experience, what was the day like for you? And then there's 3 choices. Were you able to handle the whole group instruction that your teacher was delivering? Or were you lost, or were you kind of bored, right? And so 40% of these kids, thousands of kids, and we've asked this question for 4 years now, I think. So we have a lot of data on this, and year after year, it's pretty much the same thing. About 40% of kids say I can handle that level of instruction. 30% say that they were lost, and 30% say they were bored. And that's just 60% of kids not being served Yet here's still the educational system, just let's do more of this, right? Like, let's not even think about maybe not grouping kids by age or doing smaller classes or, none of it is being changed at all. After a year in Prenda, this 40% engaged jumps to 75% engaged. Kids saying, I can do school now. I'm working at my level. I'm not bored. I'm adequately challenged. I'm not frustrated, and I'm not bored. Still too low for me. Like, I don't understand why this number's not 100%. It should be 100% at Prenda. So we still have 10% of kids feeling like it's too hard, and 15% of kids that say that they're not challenged enough, which is interesting because I have a 7-year-old in a microschool, and the other day she went to her guide and just said, "Hey, I think my goals are not hard enough for me." And it's like, it's too easy for me. And so they just went in there, they adjusted her goals. They made the change, and now she's like, good, this is me. We call it a learning frontier. In learning science, it's called a zone of proximal development, like the Goldilocks zone, where something is not too hard or not too easy. But she was, as a 7-year-old, she was able to be aware that she was not being challenged. She saw that as a problem. Most kids will be like, oh, sweet, it's easy, like I'm going to coast, right? But as a 7-year-old, she was able to see that was a problem, advocate for herself, and fix that problem with her guide without any paperwork or discussions or any changes to any sort of plans for her, to just fix that in a moment. And I think that is really kind of the gold standard for where we need to get to with mastery-based personalized academics, where every student is using all of their learning minutes to be at that learning frontier.
Yeah, and you're seeing academic growth too, like you mentioned earlier.
Right.
Just extraordinary outcomes there in academic ways. So, Katie, I'd love
Totally.
to ask, some people will dismiss microschools. They'll say, oh, yeah, they're doing great things. Personalized learning is great. But, this is such a small drop in the bucket of the larger education system. And I think one of the things that Prenda has shown is actually small is scalable. So I wonder if you can talk about how you've been able to grow and scale these dozen person microschools to serve thousands of learners across the US. What are your numbers look like there?
Yeah, of course. Um, yeah. So typically when someone starts a school, they'll get a certain number of kids, and then the goal is to increase the number of kids to scale vertically, right? And then only once they have a school that's working with maybe 300 or 400 kids, they'll be like, well, maybe we'll start another location, right? But from the get-go, we thought, no, that's not what's best for kids, right? If I could have a nickel for every time in a meeting, in a Prenda meeting, that someone said, but that wouldn't be good for kids. Like, that is the underlying factor that polices all of our decisions, is that the best thing for kids? And so right from the beginning, we knew that we were not going to be scaling vertical schools. Like, we're going to scale horizontally with a system that was good for kids. We also knew that we needed to remove as many of the barriers to entry for the guide as possible. And a lot of this is actually just imposter syndrome. There are so many amazing parents out there who have the time and have the desire, and they just think, oh, I could never. Right. And so we want to destroy, oh, I could never, with so much confidence and so much support and so many tools and resources to give them confidence to think, oh, I could if, right? I could if I didn't have to plan all of the curriculum. I could if I had a little help with marketing. I could if I didn't have to deal with the business backend. So any I could ifs, we try to take off the table and do for the guide. Because when I first sat down with Kelly, we kind of drew out a little chart, a little spectrum. It's like, there are some people at this end of the spectrum that are going to do whatever they can for their kids. These are the parents of the kids that are in the most pain in conventional schooling, right? Their kids are absolutely not having it in school. And so they will pull them out. They will do anything. They will homeschool. They will pay crazy amounts of money for private school. They'll do anything, right? And then there are parents on this side of the spectrum who are going to go with the flow, go with the norm, and not really rock the boat ever. And then there's a whole bunch of people in the middle who would love to do something different if it was just a little easier. And so we've tried to make this getting something different be a little bit easier, right? And so I think that's why we found success in able to scale this, is because we've kind of come at it with that mentality and with those goals.
And can you give us a sense of numbers in terms of how many of your Prenda microschools are operating, how many students you've served either now or historically?
Yes. So in the last 5 years, this is our 6th school year. So I guess in the last 6 years. I'm really bad at year math. Since 2018, we've helped over 1,000 people start microschools.
Mm.
And we've served nearly 10,000 kids over that course of time that have come through our program. Do they always stay with us forever? No. Sometimes they're having a hard time in whatever school setting or homeschooling. They'll come into Prenda. It's a huge reset for them. They'll get their mental health in order. They'll rediscover their love for learning. They'll feel empowered, and then their family will be like, "We're going to try school again," right? And so we're so happy to be a part of the healing journey that those families who come to us just for a short time. We're so grateful to be a part of their journey. And then we have other families who are just microschooling families, and that's just what they do, right? So currently we have about 230 people using the Prenda platform to educate their families and in microschools. We offer both a homeschool option if you want to do the Prenda platform with your family, or if you want to invite other kids into that. So we see both of those as microschools. We think every homeschooler should think of themselves as a microschooler.
But
But
most of the Prendas are multifamily microschools. Is that
yeah,
right? Yeah.
the 90% of them are
Yeah.
multifamily microschools.
And
Yes.
and many of them are operating in Arizona, which was the birthplace of Prenda back in 2018. It's where you and Kelly live. And also, Arizona was the pioneer in universal school choice, where every family in Arizona has access to a portion of state allocated funding for education to use in whatever kind of educational environment they want, including microschools. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about sort of financial access with the Prenda
Yeah.
model.
Yeah. So we definitely love any ESA program that any state will pass. We love the Arizona law. Similar laws have just been passed in Florida and Utah, coming online in several other states as well. Here's what this program does. In publicly funded education, I know ESA is a form of public funding, but in traditional public funded education, there are a lot of restrictions on what you can and can't do. Mastery-based learning, like we've talked about today, is illegal with that kind of funding because a teacher is legally mandated to expose all those 9-year-olds to the agreed upon state standards. They don't, they can lose their job, right? If they're like, yeah, we're going to just learn something else, they will lose their job. It's not okay to have every child learning at their own pace, at their own level, using a different curriculum. That's illegal, which that's the kind of differentiation we need. And so early days in Prenda, before Arizona passed their universal ESA, we did this all through charter funding in Arizona and through progressive charter online charters in other states. We'd find a superintendent or principal that said, hey, I want to actually offer this to families, and there's a way that we can do it and still stay within the regulations of this state funding. So we tried to do that for a long time, and it worked for a lot of kids, but there were a lot of our families who are like, this still, it's like, I tried to leave. I'm trying to get away from that. I'm looking for more educational freedom and more personalization and flexibility. And I thought I was going to get that with Prenda, and it's like followed me here, you know? And so with the ESA program, we're allowed to be Prenda in a way that we really weren't when we were still operating under the charter umbrella. But even now, like we still operate, like we still have kids who are enrolled in Prenda and are enrolled in charters. Like we want to be funding agnostic. Essentially, you can pay with private dollars. If we found a charter partner who wanted to partner with us, we still have several. Great. If you are in an ESA state, awesome. Like we strive to provide as many different avenues to financial access as you can to reach Prenda. We find that the ESA programs are typically the most accessible for parents.
Yeah. Yeah. So as we wrap up, Kaity, you've been with Prenda now 6 years. What do you see as the next 6 years for Prenda and for microschooling and alternative education more generally?
Even though we've been doing this for a while, we are still really in the infancy of understanding the scientific, like the learning science that's really happening in mastery-based and personal education, and the balance between speed and retention and all of these things. So I think that over the next 6 years, we're going to see our learning model become even more advanced and more tailored to the students' curiosity and interests. I think we're going to get a lot better at capturing that learning, displaying it, and measuring it in meaningful ways that can then be used to change the hearts and minds of parents nationally, internationally, and educators. And I think we're going to see right now, we have, like I said, 230-ish microschools running now. But every spring, we have about 20,000 parents coming looking to our microschool marketplace for microschools. So if every one of those parents has 2 kids, that's 40,000 kids looking for microschools. That's enough demand to make 4,000 microschools, right?
Mm,
And if those
wow.
parents had 3 kids, that's 60,000 kids. If they have 4 kids like me, 80,000 kids, right? Like we don't know that number. So the demand is intense, and I think it will intensify even further over the next 6 years because parents are going to start demanding something different and looking for different options. And with more and more ESA programs being passed, more and more families that want something different, we're just removing those barriers to entry one at a time, more and more over time. So that's what I see in the next 6 years.
I completely agree. It'll be so exciting to see what happens next. So, Kaity, if my listeners and viewers want to learn more about Prenda and maybe launch their own or see if there's one nearby, what is the best way for them to do that?
If you go to prenda.com, that's going to be all about becoming a guide. There's a little 10-minute video that me and Kelly do on our homepage that will walk you through the basics. You can download our resource guides, guide tools, our curriculum guide. I also do a little like mini class, a beginner's guide to microschooling that you can access. It's like 30 minutes if you really want to understand like both the logistics and the philosophy of what we're doing. If you want to put your child in a microschool, prenda.com, click on find a microschool. You'll be able to scroll down and access our microschool marketplace map where you can put your zip code in and see if there's anything near you. Guaranteed, unless you live in Arizona, there probably won't be. So your next thought as a parent who wants their child in a microschool is to say, could I guide? Or who in my life would I love? Who is my dream guide in my life for my kids? And the question I always ask parents is, who is a combination of Mr. Rogers, Miss Frizzle, and Mary Poppins in your
Hmm.
life? That's the person that you want to, that they should be running a microschool. And so reach out to them and just tell them about Prenda. Say, hey, if you did this, I would put my kids with you. And it's so easy to get 2, 3, 4 families interested in this and just start. And we've tried so hard to remove so many of the barriers to entry that it really is very easy to start one. And then the last thing you can do if you want to learn more about this is listen to our podcast.
I
It's
was
called
just going to prompt you to talk about
Kindled.
that. Kindled. Yes.
Yeah. So this is all of these ideas, all of the educational philosophy, the psychology, the neuroscience, the learning science behind all of this. We talk about this every week on our podcast, the Kindled podcast for parents and educators. So check that out.
Yes, I definitely recommend the Kindle podcast, and you can find that on whatever podcast app as well as from the Prenda.com site.
Yep. Prenda.com/podcast. You can find them all.
Kaity Broadbent, thank you so much for being on
Yeah.
the Liberated podcast.
No problem. Thanks, Carrie.